Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Roxana Filipovska, and I am the Programs and Outreach Manager of the Wordle Study Center at the Yale University Art Gallery. Today is a really special program in the sense that it is actually the last one of the season and the last one of the year for the gallery. So thank you so much for gathering virtually with us. We will be shining a spotlight on conservation of time-based media. And for this topic, I have two colleagues with me. So the first is Maddie Smith, postgraduate associate in time-based media conservation. And Maddie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I also have Morgan E. Freeman, who is the Robert E. Steele graduate intern at the gallery. I've had a tremendous pleasure of working closely with Morgan this semester. And Morgan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Roxana. Thanks. Wonderful to be here.
Thanks so much, Morgan. So for everyone who's on the call today, we definitely encourage conversation in the chat. Time-based media conservation is an area of expertise where it's very collaborative. So we do encourage a conversation to take place. Please feel free to share questions throughout the event. I will be monitoring the chat and we'll certainly get to your questions over the course of the event as well. The way that we're structuring this is that I'm going to give an introduction to time-based media conservation at the Wordle Study Center. Then I'll hand things over to Maddie to dig deeper into a few case studies. And then Morgan's going to jump on screen to actually begin facilitating the conversation. So with that, next slide, please. The Margaret and Angus Wordle Study Center is a space for many different activities. It is a space of research, of education, and what I hope to highlight today is that it is a very dynamic space of art conservation. So the Wordle Study Center is located on Yale West Campus. It's known as the gallery's hybrid study storage center. And the entire space, which is about as large as a football field, it's open plan, and it is actually a very contained environment. So whenever you visit the Wordle Study Center, the relative humidity is about 45%, and the temperature is always between about 65 to 68 degrees. And this is considered a museum standard for objects. But the Wordle Study Center holds over 42,000 objects. And as you can imagine, different objects behave differently in different environmental conditions. So at the Wordle Study Center, objects are grouped according to medium, so that the way that they are stored, the way that they are exposed to light and air and temperature, keeps in mind how to preserve them for future generations. Next slide, please. In addition to that overarching climate of the Wordle Study Center, there are microclimates within its walls. So for instance, right now we're looking at a microclimate case that holds some of our American silver collection. And metals, when they are exposed to air, succumb to rust. And so these microclimate cases are actually kept at about 30% relative humidity and also slightly cooler temperatures as well. So just know that there are individual microclimates in the Wordle Study Center. I want to highlight this because oftentimes museums and galleries have to make really hard decisions when putting objects on display, because sometimes object display and conservation are seen as opposite ends of the spectrum. Sometimes putting something on display might expose it to humidity, might expose it to body temperature, might expose it to risk. Whereas conservation, traditionally, as it perhaps could have been envisioned or imagined, is oftentimes about preserving the object, making sure that it is kept in safe conditions. And sometimes putting an object on display could put it at risk. Here at the Wordle Study Center, we really try to think about the continuity between access and conservation. So with such microclimate cases as this, these objects are actively being conserved and they are visible to researchers, visitors, and the curators. Next slide, please. Another way that conservation is a fixture of the Wordle Study Center is that the Wordle Study Center is right across the hallway, right across the hall from the shared conservation lab. And so here, as you're looking at this image, this is a photograph of Irma Passeri, who's in the foreground, the senior conservator of paintings. And you also see Annika Finn, former conservation fellow, as they examine Piero di Cosimo's Virgin and Child with St. Vincent Ferrer and Jerome. The painting dates to about 1510 to 1515. And so this is just one example of painting conservation that is taking place at the gallery. But this shared conservation lab, it's quite a massive space, and colleagues from the Peabody Museum of Natural History work here, the Yale Center for British Art, the Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage also work here. And so this is a shared space. So when I'm, for instance, at the Wordle Study Center, I oftentimes see objects wheeled back and forth between the Wordle and the shared conservation lab. There's again this continuity of display, research, and conservation. But some objects in the gallery's collection might not be as visible or as legible when it comes to their conservation approach. And here I have works in mind such as the following. Next slide, please. So right now we are looking at Howardina Pindel's Free, White, and 21. It's a work from 1980. It's a color video with sound. The duration of the work is 12 minutes, 15 seconds. And when the work is not on view, it is stored in the Wordle Study Center as a videotape in one of our compact shelving storage sites. But of course, the work is so much more than the tape itself. You might say that it is the content of the videotape. Next slide, please. When we think about a work like Free, White, and 21, we might think about the narrative that Howardina Pindel shares, the way that she seems to address the gallery viewer. And when the work is on display, such as it is now, actually currently in the exhibit On the Basis of Art, you can see it right in the corner of your screen. It's actually, you see the monitor all the way to the right, and it's on a pedestal. So it is a work that has to be displayed on a pedestal. It is played, the videotape is played, it is viewed on a monitor. And all of these components are actually really important to experiencing the work. It evokes the time that Howardina Pindel made the work in 1980, evoking the relevant technology. The format evokes interviews on television. The fact that it's in color, the fact that it has sound is really crucial to one's experience of the work. And so yes, the work is a videotape, but it's also so much more. So that when we conserve it, we really have to think about what is the media environment within which this work can continue to be experienced, to be legible. Next slide, please. This work falls into the category of time-based media. And here I'm sharing a very common definition of this term. So I'll read it out loud for everyone. Contemporary artworks that include video, film, slide, audio, or computer technologies are referred to as time-based media works because they have duration as a dimension and unfold to the viewer over time. So as you read this definition, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, it seems as though time is the crucial component of time-based media, but time, of course, is a component of most artworks. So I want to acknowledge that before we dig into this category. Next slide, please. With art, there is, of course, the time of making And here I'm taking liberty to bring in this fabulous painting by Carrie James Marshall. It's untitled. And it, of course, depicts a figure painting. It is a painting that's very self-referential. So here I'm just highlighting, of course, every single work, time went into it in order for it to be made. Next slide, please. Many art objects also have the time of performance, the time of use, the time of ritual, the time within which they are activated. And for this, I'm showing an example. This is the image on the lower right hand. This is an example of Weiang Puppet Theater, Indo-Pacific Puppet Theater. And there are so many objects that are actually activated within the space of performance or ritual or movement. And then in the upper right, I have one example of viewing an artwork. Here we have a visitor to the gallery experiencing a Rothko painting. And so the time also that it takes to experience an artwork. These are all ways that time impacts art and our experience of art. Next slide, please. And yet, time-based media work, time-based media art, they seem to demand specific things when it comes to art. And part of that is really their deep imbrication within technology or the medium within which they have to be experienced. And when we talk about technology, there's also, of course, this question of how quickly technology is innovated and how quickly technology becomes obsolete, which makes the challenge of conserving time-based media really, really unique. And for this, I'd love to bring in my colleague, Maddie Smith, back on to share a bit more about her work at the gallery.
Thank you, Roxana, for that wonderful introduction to time-based media art. Let me start by introducing myself again. My name is Maddie Smith, and I am the Postgraduate Associate in Time-Based Media Conservation here at the Yale University Art Gallery. This, as you can see in this photo, this is the back of my head. Here, I'm preparing a vintage television monitor for conservation use. The conservation of time-based media artworks encompasses many activities. It's not only hands-on work to restore and repair the physical object, it's also creating documentation about the artwork, interviewing artists and others who were directly involved in the creation process, conducting preventive measures such as stockpiling old equipment and monitoring the temperature and climate where artworks are stored, as well as continuing to research and learn about new technologies and standards surrounding time-based media conservation. And perhaps one of the most important activities is communicating and collaborating with allied professionals and other colleagues about what is the best method of care for each artwork. This is partly as a result of the ever-changing nature of technology, as Roxana mentioned. Each artwork is unique, and therefore each conservation treatment requires a unique approach to address the needs of the work and to stay faithful to the artist's intention. So today, I will use two artworks in the gallery's collection, Bill Viola's Study for Emergence and Tala Madani's Chit Chat, to discuss time-based media conservation and a few of the considerations and constraints that must be adhered to when caring for, exhibiting, and conserving these artworks for posterity. I will begin with introducing Bill Viola's Study for Emergence. So this past September, I had the chance to install Bill Viola's Study for Emergence in the gallery's Nolan Center for Art and Education for a Yale undergraduate course entitled Medieval Drama. Study for Emergence is a 2002 video installation artwork that consists of a color video on a freestanding LCD flat panel. The work is devoid of sound, it's 12 minutes in length, and it depicts in extreme slow motion, almost as if you're viewing a painting, two women sitting on either side of a marble cistern full of water, waiting. But for what we don't know, at around the 8 or 9 minute mark, the women slowly turn towards the cistern as a ghostly pale and gaunt man emerges from within. Water droplets turn streams of water flowing over the edge of the vessel. You can see these two women here, and you can see the ghostly gaunt man. The two women then catch the man as his legs give out, pick him up, which is the motion we're seeing here, and lay him on the ground at the base of the cistern, where they console and comfort him until the end of the video. As specified by the artist, Bill Viola, the work must always be displayed on the artist-created, custom-framed LCD flat-screen TV, and either mounted into a wall resembling a hanging painting, or mounted on a pedestal of a specific height, resembling a framed picture. So in addition to the artist-created LCD flat-screen TV, the components of the artwork include the original Digibeta video cassette tape, 2 DVDs to be used for exhibitions, 3 different kinds of cables, a surge suppressor, DVD player, and an iScan Pro signal enhancer. Now, I do not expect you all to know what all of those are, but I just really kind of wanted to give you all just kind of a sneak peek behind the scenes when it comes to what we acquire when we are bringing your work into our collection. The installation of the artwork for the class viewing required the use of almost all of these components, minus the original Digibeta video cassette tape, which remained safely stored in its cabinet in the Wordle Center. Shown here is the equipment list document that was included in the installation plans and manual packet the gallery received from Bill Viola's gallery at acquisition. It's very detailed. Now, some of you may be thinking, wait, this doesn't sound like conservation. To which I'd respond that the activities that fall under time-based media conservation, as I mentioned, are not only limited to those activities that involve the physical repair or preservation of the artwork. Faithfully adhering to the artist's directives and installing the artwork as specified by the artist is a large part of time-based media conservation. As part of the acquisition of the artwork, Viola provided this detailed installation plans and manual document, and in it, it's specified step-by-step how to install and exhibit Study for Emergence. Through this document, Viola expressed the importance of displaying the artwork as a whole, meaning on the screen he created, as you can see here on the left of the photo, using the equipment provided, which you can kind of see gathered in the rest of the photo, displaying the work as the artist intended for it to be seen, no matter how formal or informal the exhibition setting. So while we have 2 DVDs of the artwork, and it would seem like the easiest way to show the work to a class for educational purposes would be just to play the DVD on a TV, from a conservation perspective, and more importantly, from the artist's perspective, the artwork is not whole and complete without the artist-made LCD flat panel monitor. So for the class, it was necessary to completely install the artwork, including all the components. You can see here, it's far less of a formal presentation. You can see all of the cables and cords. Now, of course, for an exhibition, none of that would be seen, except for the TV. But because it was for a class setting, I did want to kind of give them, and by extension, you all, a little bit more information as to how the work is happening. So this made the presentation for the class viewing a little more challenging, and thus a fun conservation endeavor for me to take on. And for this instance, I decided to install the work on one of the tables in the Nolan Center, as the height was approximate to that of the required pedestal specified by Viola. And in here in this photograph, you can see the setup on the table in the Nolan Center. So we have the artist created LCD panel TV. We have the surge suppressor and cables galore. We have the signal enhancer, which is plugged into the surge suppressor, and the signal enhancer is the communicator between the TV and the DVD player. It ensures that the signal is being translated correctly from the DVD player to the television. And also here you can see the students watching the video in the Nolan Center. And if you're struggling to find the work, there it is. Yes, the artist created monitor, it might be small in size, but the impact of the work is definitely large. And it really was a joy to get to install this artwork and also to be able to observe how the students interacted with and interpreted the artwork. Now we move on to Chit Chat. Chit Chat is a mixed media and silent single channel stop motion animation video artwork, a long jumble of words, created by the artist Hala Madani, who graduated from Yale School of Art in 2006 with her Master's of Fine Art in Painting. Before we dive into the details about the artwork, let's watch a short clip from the work. And as a reminder, it is silent, so don't worry if you can't hear anything, there's nothing to hear. So as we just saw, in Chit Chat, we have two men facing each other in profile with a third man partially hidden behind them. They seem to all be in conversation with each other. In the clip we just watched, which is only the first 31 seconds of this 2.5 minute video, the clip we just watched, the two men in front place a party hat on the third man, and then they begin to take large bites out of the middle man until there's nothing left of the man except the pink hat. If it was a little bit hard to kind of tell what was happening, that is kind of the point. This work really does, it's very thickly painted, so the images are a bit more obscure. Throughout the rest of the video, the two remaining men continue to engage in banter that's by turns friendly, argumentative, and eventually, literally bileless. They throw the man back up. Like much of Madani's oeuvre, this work is both slightly violent and exceptionally humorous. So to create this 2.5 minute video, Madani hand painted roughly 5,000 images. It's just incredible to create this work. The video is shown inside an approximately 5-foot high telescope made out of unvarnished chipboard wood, as you can see here in the picture on the left, and that's me doing a final condition check of it during the current exhibition it's in. Viewers look through the small end of the telescope and see the silent stop motion animation playing at the back of the telescope. The experience is as if the viewer is watching the work inside a dark movie theater. It is quite extraordinary. With Chit Chat, we have the opposite situation as we did with Bill Viola's Study for Emergence, where the artist has given the gallery a large amount of freedom in how to display the artwork. For Tala, the core of the artwork is the stop motion animation video, and how it's displayed is up to the gallery, including whether or not to show the work inside the telescope. In fact, the work has been projected on a wall, and it's been shown on a small video screen that's attached to a wall, both at different museums than the gallery. But here at the gallery, we have this telescope and we've chosen to show it through the telescope. So as the conservator, my role is to understand that freedom of display and exhibition options and ensure that the artwork is exhibited in a way that remains as close and true to the original artist intent as possible. So when the gallery acquired Chit Chat in 2008, we acquired the work as a DVD and a portable DVD player with a built-in screen, much like what we used as kids on road trips, sitting in the back of cars. I'm not sure if that rings true to how many viewers, but it definitely hit home for me. You can see the model here. This is a different brand, but this is exactly what it looks like. So here we have the front as the screen, and then you lift up the screen and you just put your DVD right in there. So this combination DVD player and screen was used as the display screen installed in the back of the wooden telescope. During the last exhibition of the artwork at the gallery a few years ago, the DVD player became an unreliable playback method as it would intermittently stop functioning properly. This caused extra issues for gallery staff and caused gallery staff to begin to think about additional methods of displaying the artwork. So when preparing for the On the Basis of Art 150 Years of Women at Yale exhibition that's currently open at the gallery and is exceptional, and please, if you've not had a chance to see it, please go. The gallery's curatorial, exhibitions, IT, registrars, and conservation departments all worked collaboratively to envision this updated exhibition display. We as a group, we wanted to find a playback option that would be more reliable when the video was playing in the gallery. So as the conservator, my role and my motivation was to find an option that would still fit inside the telescope. Ultimately, we decided to use an iPad mini to play a digital file of the artwork. And this digital file was created by Tala Madani, so it came directly from the artist's hand. And as a conservator, that felt quite authentic to me. And as an added bonus, the iPad mini also fits inside the back of the telescope, so it's a suitable alternative to the original DVD player / monitor. And here you can see the before and after. This work is a good example of working collaboratively because this is both a time-based media artwork and it's a sculpture. So I was able to collaborate with objects conservation. As well, I was working collaboratively with other colleagues at the museum, as well as the artist and the artist studio. So it was very much a group effort, which is very important. Here you can see the before and after of the conservation work. On the left is the original display setup, with the DVD being played on the combination DVD player and screen, which is stored in the back of the telescope. And as you can see, the combination DVD player monitor didn't fit perfectly into the opening that was cut to show the work. So each time it was displayed, a little bit of like reconfiguration always had to occur to allow the monitor to sit squarely in and centered inside that hole. On the right is the updated display setup, using an iPad to play an artist-created digital file of the animation. I'm quite pleased with the updated exhibition display, and a big shout out to our exhibitions team who created this wonderful new back to custom fit the iPad so it sits in there. It's an exceptional job. This is all thanks to collaboration that I was able to take part in between my colleagues at the gallery, and all in the pursuit of conserving this work for exhibition. So Chit Chat is one of 3 time-based media artworks included in the On the Basis of Art 150 Years of Women at Yale exhibition that's currently ongoing at the gallery. And it also, one of the other of the 3 time-based media works happens to be Howardena Pindell's Free White and 21, which Roxana mentioned earlier in this program. So right there, you all have already been introduced to 2 of the 3 works. It would just benefit you all to be able to go see the 3rd one. The exhibition runs until January 9th, 2022. So if you are interested in experiencing these works in person, you definitely still have time. So thank you all so much for listening. I'm now going to invite my colleague Morgan to join me for the discussion portion of this program. Morgan. I'm so happy to get to chat with you today.
Hi, Maddie. Thanks so
Hi.
much. And thank you for your fascinating introduction to all the critical work that you do. I'd also like to invite you all watching to utilize the chat to ask any questions you may have for Maddie as we continue. I'm sure many are curious, so I wanted to start by asking, how does one enter the field of time-based media conservation? Is that a track that we would imagine differently than the training a conservator working in more traditional mediums receives, or can you speak a little bit to your experience?
Yes, absolutely. So it is a bit of a different track to more traditional conservation training and education. Although now there is a dedicated conservation school program for time-based media conservation at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts, just a little plug. But prior to 2018, which was when that program began, the education path and the training path to being a time-based media conservator is a bit different. So with traditional conservation, you need to be both a scientist, you need to be an artist, an art historian. It requires a lot of pre-training. You need to take organic chemistry in undergrad, as well as art history, or this tends to be the path. As well as doing pre-program internships to start working on your hand skills, which are really just your skills using your hands, making sure you're steady and you're understanding the basic elements of conservation. And that's all prior to going to conservation school, where you will earn your Master's of Science in Conservation. So that's the traditional route. So for time-based media conservation, it can really vary. It's a wide range of options and opportunities. I started actually in museums as a registrar. So there I learned how to, a registrar and collection manager. So I learned how to handle artworks, kind of got to have a first person perspective into doing condition checks and handling and packing and shipping artworks, as well as all the upkeep and maintenance necessary and documentation. But I went to New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, and I did my master's in moving image archiving and preservation, or as those in the know say, MEAP, but it's not a very attractive acronym. It doesn't roll off the tongue. But there I was able to learn how to handle how to handle film and video, all the different mediums that fall under time-based media conservation. But I'm also trained as an archivist. I would say that when you do time-based media conservation, a lot of allied fields kind of come into play. So you need to understand a little bit about digital preservation, metadata. We borrow a lot from library science degrees, technicians. Honestly, I learn a lot from old video broadcast stations. That's definitely a big field that people are growing older from that field, and there definitely is a need for more expertise there. But all of this is to say, it's a lot of hobbling together different fields to become a time-based media conservator. And it doesn't necessarily require that you go and get a master's, although I think that is looked for more and more now. I want to advocate for, really not doing work without being paid. So really finding ways where you can learn these techniques, but also make a living off of it.
No, that's a really great point. And it's interesting that you also referenced the previous work that you had as a registrar. I imagine that database and cataloging those skills really come in handy in the work that you do every day. And it's also very interesting to hear about the synergies between the other fields that you mentioned. Which kind of leads me to my next question. Given all of the need to stay up to date with best practices in your field, which can at times be rapidly changing, but also be very referential to the past, what kinds of translation needs to take place in order to make time-based media legible to your professional colleagues, but also to our audiences?
It's a really great question. I think that I like to think of time-based media conservators as kind of like a human yellow pages. So we having a little bit of knowledge on all of the different fields that all combine when you're dealing with this large variety of technical equipment and mediums. So knowing a little bit from each section, but being able to also acknowledge where you need to talk to an expert. So it's all about knowing those connections and connecting people to come in to help you with those works. But when it comes to translation, I find it's really important to, one, understand what you're talking about, but to be able to express and communicate these techniques, these terms, these concepts in a way that is very universal. I was thinking about this last night, actually, and in a way, I view time-based media art as kind of the most approachable artworks. I think that at times people are very intimidated because, you know, they're thinking, oh, this moves, it has additional elements to it. I don't really quite understand. It's not as if you're just hanging a painting on a wall. You have equipment necessary, you have maintenance and upkeep, as well as, not to mention, obsolescence of equipment. But actually, if you think about it, every single person on this call today knows how to use technology. We use it, we're literally using it right now. We're online, we're watching a video. So in a way, it's actually it's very approachable. We understand more than we think. So I think when I'm trying to be an interpreter or discuss these concepts with my colleagues and others that are collaborating on projects, it's just reminding people that it really is not as intimidating as you think. We all deal with this every day. So it's trying to take that fear and trepidation around these kinds of artworks and make them more accessible.
Absolutely. I really like that idea of challenging. We have this preconceived notion that this is a intimidating thing to approach, but turning it on its head and thinking about it as a more accessible everyday part of our lives, as opposed to also this kind of specialized type of information that we don't want to interact with or fear.
Right.
And then I also like that you spoke to the collaborative nature of this process. For example, you mentioned the preparators who did such an excellent job when you had to modify the Tal Madani work. And just to go back to Tal Madani's chit chat, I want to talk about the objectivity or the objecthood of that work, because it's so different from the Bill Viola, for example. It's really striking that the work can appear as a telescope, as the galleries have it installed at the moment, but then also on its own as a video, as other institutions have displayed the work. So how do you navigate that flexibility?
Ooh. Navigating the flexibility. Well, I like to think of each time you display the work, we call it an iteration. So each time the work is shown, it has its own display specifications and its own circumstances, even if that's just where in the gallery space it's placed. So I think, as I've said, when you are working with these kinds of artworks, it is very unique and individual. Not only each artwork is unique and individual, but each instance, each iteration of the work is individual. So it's really thinking about that specific situation where you're going to show the work and what will express the artist's intent and bring the work, the core of the work to life the best. So sometimes that may be that in the specific space, putting a telescope, which you can't initially tell. Morgan, we've talked about this when you went to see Chit Chat in the gallery.
I was wondering, would you mind returning to the photo that you have of you viewing the
Yes.
work?
Thank you for reminding me to go backwards. Oops. There we go.
Great.
So this, yes, so for everyone, this is the work actually installed in the current exhibition. And it is placed in kind of in a corner with the telescope jutting out into the gallery space. So Morgan, you were saying that when you initially went to go find the work, you almost missed it because you were looking for this, this video. So if we take this as an example, sometimes this is not the best way to maybe have the work shown because we need maybe a more immediate reaction. This work is, it also, I mean, this has a lot to do, this is exhibition and curatorial are absolutely at the forefront of making these decisions. So it's what is going to really bring the curator's vision as well for that exhibition. What's the best display method for that? But it is definitely a collaboration and a conversation between all of the different colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really important to note the experiential difference of a work like this, the way that it's presented, the bending down. And I think for this work in particular, what I love, since it's about communication and the messiness of that and the struggle of that, the way that you have a kind of like direct interaction with the object, it is what I think makes the objectivity of this work really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can even see that on the right photo, you can see the darker spots on the telescope edge. That wear is from people physically going up, touching the telescope, putting their face on it, getting their like oil from hands and faces on it. So each and what is the word? Each interaction with this work leaves its mark. So yeah, what you're saying, it's very physical and body, which is what the artwork is also.
I'd love to jump in here and maybe bring in a couple of questions from the audience because they certainly build up off of the Tala Madani Chit Chat piece. And I would say, Maddie and Morgan, feel free to respond to this. But we have one question about how often do you get to work directly with artists and what is gained in that process?
Well, I think the three of us can comment on working with artists. The three of us were actually, Roxana, Morgan, and myself were actually able to have a really very nice informal talk with Tala Madani a couple of weeks ago, where we were able to ask her some questions about this work specifically, but also just her practices and kind of what got her started creating these painted stop motion animations, but also just her practice, her full practice. So that's one example of us being able to interact with artists. But I can say just from my own personal experience, it is pretty common that you're, as a conservation practice, you're able to interact with the artist, if only through email or maybe in these COVID times, a Zoom chat. But we do studio visits. Sometimes artists come for the install of artworks. It's very, I would say it is very individual depending on what the artist would like and how they see their involvement with the artwork once it's part of a gallery or an institution's collection. Mhm.
Morgan, do you want to jump in as to what was the experience like of actually connecting with Tala Madani after conducting research on Tala Madani in preparation for this program? What would you say that conversation allows you to do as someone who works in a museum?
Yeah, no, it was fantastic to be able to activate and engage the work outside of a gallery setting. And I think just the collaborative nature of it all, having an ongoing relationship with an artist, especially when it's so common for artists to have to practice this kind of letting go of their work once it enters a private collection or an institutional collection. And that is part of the reality of being a working artist. But at the same time, when you can kind of have an insight into the life of an object and what that interaction is like with its publics, I think that's a really special opportunity. And it, I think, puts the institution and the artist in more of an ongoing dialogue and as colleagues with each other, which can be really exciting and expand what we think of as being this hard line between an institution and an artist.
I agree. And I think too that that museums are constantly wondering when it comes to time-based media conservation, to what extent is the original crucial?
Mm-hmm.
To what extent is migration the tactic to take? Migration, when I say that, that means maybe converting a videotape into a DVD, into a digital file, et cetera, right? This idea of migrating work from one format to another. And another, I would say, like a class of tactics is emulation, which is basically thinking like, okay, conceptually the artist is interested in this, but maybe the technology is not as crucial to the concept as, for instance, the quality of the image, the resolution, et cetera. And so I think that interviewing an artist is really crucial because I think it empowers someone to develop an ethics of care.
Absolutely.
Really think through, okay, how am I going to navigate to these decisions? Is the original crucial? Is migration the tactic to take, or is emulation the way to go? So I think I think it's a very exciting component actually of museum work, that one gets to really form these connections, conservators, artists, curators, artists, etc. So as a follow-up question, this is for anybody who's an artist on this call. So I would say, Maddie, do you have any recommendations for artists who are working in time-based media now? So let's say this is an artist who's kind of looking ahead and thinking about what does a museum need in order for my work to enter the collection and then to be cared for?
I love this question because it's so important, I think, that as an artist currently creating works that could be considered time-based media, I think my largest piece of advice or thing that I think museums are looking for is document your practice, document what you're doing. We love documentation, can never have enough. So really documenting, but also archiving your works. So maybe this is a very, very specific tech thing, but making copies of your works can never go wrong. So I don't mean sharing them. What I mean is that have 3 versions of your work, 3 copies stored in 3 separate locations that are ideally of different climates. Now this isn't, may not be possible, but you've got one of your, if you're making a digital artwork, so it's on the computer, you have a digital file, store one of those. You can have that digital file stored locally on your computer, but then maybe have 2 external hard drives, and you store one of those, maybe at your house in your apartment, but then send that other hard drive to, I don't know, a friend, your family, where they live in a different climate. So in case anything happens, you don't lose your artwork. That is a big thing, but mostly it's document your practice. We love documentation. And also ask questions if you have any questions. I'm very happy to talk more about what other practices you can do.
Maddie, I kind of chuckled at your response to send the copies into different climates, but I think it's so important because from the history of film, which of course is a part of time-based media, we know that filmmakers who lived in certain parts of the world, especially very humid climates, it's not that there weren't filmmakers, it's just that those film reels didn't survive.
Right.
So for longevity, it is actually really important to note that, if you're a contemporary artist and you're still drawn to analog, right? From a kind of collection standpoint, I can tell you that film really likes cold storage. So I know that, the Tate Modern, for instance, keeps its film at like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees relative humidity. So invest in that kind of environment. And I want to acknowledge that we have some really fabulous questions in the chat, and one is more historical and then another one is more forward looking. So maybe I'll go with the historical one first. And I'm actually just going to read most of this question because it's really astute. So the question is, I was recently reading about some of Nam June Paik's 1960s artworks involving televisions, and how the content of the work was partly determined by what was being broadcast on TV at that time. Mm-hmm. How would you approach conserving something like this, where the work was originally presented as an intervention into the media environment that no longer exists in the same way?
Wow. First of all, great choice in artist. Fantastic. And also that's just such a wonderful moment in time with creating time-based media artworks. That's a challenge. It definitely is. It's artworks that are very much of the moment and of the time. And as we're talking about time has passed, and we don't have access to that anymore. Can you repeat the end of the question again? Sorry. So how do we deal with something that is?
So it's really the question about, if an artwork is so embedded in a media environment, how do we deal with the conservation of that? I can start us off by just, because I have more technical questions for you about this, Maddie, and I know that you can answer them, but one thing that I'll highlight is oftentimes curators and conservators working with time-based media of historic artworks really do think about them as environmental works, where it's not just the artwork itself, but really thinking about how would it have been shown, but not just that, but how would similar kinds of images and messages and broadcasts would have been shared as well. And so there's, I would say that this is where the exhibition becomes a really exciting, almost like time capsule, or a method by which you could really reactivate and recontextualize the work. So whether that is by bringing some original broadcast materials or maybe print materials, activating the work through ephemera, I think would be really, really exciting. Another thing to highlight is, yet again, that sometimes time-based media falls into the category of almost architecture, because again, there's this question of what kind of structure needs to exist, whether material or conceptual or commercial, in order for the work to exist. So Maddie, I'm curious about, like, for instance, like, how do you deal with this question of like time specific TVs, right? And time specific, right? So the time specific technology that would have signified to the viewer that, oh yes, I am watching TV and I could switch between the channels, between this artwork and also, for instance, a news broadcast.
Mhm. So how would we kind of deal with that conservation? Well, I would also just add, like, it's archival material is really important as well to create the context, which also goes back to document everything you're doing, because you never know when that documents could be used to contextualize a historical work. But when it comes to the conservation of, like, let's say the TVs, and I'll go backwards. In the first photo I showed of the back of my head, that is in fact, that is actually in fact an old television. It's called a cathode ray tube television, or CRT, and it is used to, here you go. It's used, we use it in conservation to both play back our videos that were made, analog videos that are made to be shown on this generation of television, which is also what Nam June Paik, the works Nam June Paik was creating, were on these cathode ray tube televisions, which are the precursor to flat screen TVs that we now all have in our homes, as well as flat screen computer monitors. But these can be used also to create the environment when you're displaying the work, for people to understand, oh, we're watching a work that is made from a previous era. Yeah, it's important to really create this full experience. Yeah.
And then now here's a question about the future. And I think this is a really lovely question to wrap up this program, because hopefully we can all kind of think together as to what might the future of time-based media conservation be. But specifically, the question is, what trends and changes do you think we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years in time-based media?
Well, that's really hard to tell, but as Roxana and Morgan and I were preparing for this, we did discuss the potential possibilities for, I hate to say it, but for just because I'm not an expert in this, but in NFTs, I do feel like, because it is quite popular, I don't have, as a conservator, you don't have a role or a choice in what happens to be long lasting in technology. So I think that so many artworks have been created as NFTs. At this moment, we are going to see works come into collections that are that. So no matter how long they stick around or not, that is, I think, a technology and a subset of skills and knowledge and expertise that I think will need to be learned and adapted in museums. I wonder if, I mean, computer art, internet art, and oh goodness, why did I just forget the word? Immersive art. So virtual reality and augmented reality, that is already coming into collections. So, and there's really wonderful research that's already happening surrounding how to conserve and care for these works that are very much ephemeral, as well as very specific on location. So I guess I'll stick with that. I think NFTs will be something we will be considering, and virtual reality, augmented reality technology. Oh, as well as 3D printed art. 3D printed art and the technology going along with that. I definitely see that's the future.
Thank you. And yeah, and if I may be so bold to also add my my perspective in is with NFTs or non-fungible tokens, some of them are time-based media, some of them are intermedia or digital, right? So we're getting into this question of what is time-based media versus what is digital art, what is
Right.
intermedial art, right? And so sometimes with an NFT, like you can just, it's a certificate for something that is actually material or is a JPEG or a still image. I certainly agree with Maddie that just more of that kind of art. I'm also curious about museums developing more post-custodial stewardship practices. So where there's more emphasis on, you know, maybe conservation as like the museum having, again, the infrastructure, the technology to play and communicate these works, but with the acknowledgement that maybe the works are not necessarily to be owned by the institution because maybe they are, you know, created by the blockchain and they are a collaborative work by indigenous artists, and it's actually in their best interest for the work not to fully enter the museum's collection, but the infrastructure in order to connect with audiences will be supplied by the museum. So that's just one thing to kind of imagine forward. But
I
go ahead, Maddie. Go ahead.
you talking about this kind of made me think about also the use of NFTs to create virtual galleries and virtual gathering spaces. I've seen some really wonderful work where it's these digital artworks that are created, and then it is this virtual gallery where you enter into the space and you're able to interact with each of these works through the internet, through a virtual experience. But as a way of kind of connecting and collaborating with people across the globe, or that perhaps, like you said, where it's to their benefit that the work not be owned or only certain elements of it be shown, you're really able to kind of maybe control a bit more. Taking the artists maybe are able to take control a little bit more of how their artwork is shown and seen, which would be very interesting to think about the role of a conservator when it comes to spaces like that.
Definitely. So if you have any ideas for Maddie, if you have any questions for Maddie, please don't hesitate to reach out to her. If you have questions for about the Wordle Study Center, please reach out to me. My colleague will be sharing those links in the chat now. You can also consult all of the artworks that we covered in this program in the chat. And Maddie, thank you so much for offering your expertise today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. And also thank you, Morgan and Roxana, for like such fantastic conversation. I really enjoy working with you both.
And Morgan, thank you so much for your brilliant questions.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be in conversation with you both. And thanks everyone for joining us at the end, at the closing of this year, and wishing everybody a safe and healthy 2022.
Definitely. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon and have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.